quiet archive record. Tonight, we're stepping into a slow unfolding. Settle in, let the outside world dissolve, and gently descend into tonight's world. In this episode, we build a careful case around one of the oldest human questions. Does anything of us continue after the body stops? We will not treat this like a debate show. We will treat it like a file on a table. We will look at claims that can be checked, details that can be compared, and methods that try to reduce mistakes. Some stories will sound impossible. Some will have ordinary explanations. Many will sit in the uneasy space between. Our goal is not to force belief. Our goal is to understand what the strongest evidence is said to be, what the strongest critiques are, and what a fair-minded listener can take away when the night is quiet and the world is far away. Tonight, we examine the strongest evidence of the afterlife. Start with a simple idea. If the afterlife is real, we should expect a few kinds of traces. We might expect personal stories that share patterns. We might expect rare cases where a person knows something they could not have learned in normal ways. We might expect effects that show up in experiments, even if the effects are small. And we might expect that over time, researchers would build methods to separate honest mistakes from fraud. But there is also the other side. If the afterlife is not real, we should still expect stories. Humans have dreams, grief, strong beliefs, and strong fears. Our minds fill gaps. We misremember. We connect dots that are not connected. We pick the hits and forget the misses. We also have people who lie. So the first rule tonight is balance, not false balance, where every claim is treated as equal. Real balance, where every claim is pushed hard, where the best cases are given time and the best critiques are also given time. The goal is to leave you with a map, not a slogan. We will move through several categories: near-death experiences, deathbed visions, after-death communication, mediumship and its controls, reports that sound like reincarnation, cases of so-called veridical information where details seem to match reality in ways that should not happen. And then the skeptical toolkit, the ways these things can be created by the brain, by culture, by chance, by suggestion, and by deception. Along the way, we will talk about the hard problem that sits under everything. What is consciousness? Is it produced by the brain, like music from a radio? Or is the brain more like a receiver, shaping something that exists more broadly? Those are huge questions. We will not solve them tonight, but we can examine why serious people argue on both sides. When you hear the phrase evidence of the afterlife, it can sound like a single pile of proof, like a stack of papers on a desk. In reality, it looks more like many small piles. Some are thick but messy. Some are thin but clean. Some are dramatic but unreliable. Some are boring but oddly stubborn. And there is a human detail too. The afterlife is not just an idea. It is tied to grief, to love, to fear of death, to hope that meaning does not vanish. This topic can make people vulnerable. That is why it matters to be careful and kind and slow. Now take a breath. Let the room be quiet. Let the story unfold at the pace it wants. One of the biggest sources of afterlife claims comes from near-death experiences. These are reports from people who were very close to death, or believed they were. They may have had a cardiac arrest. They may have been under anesthesia with severe trauma. They may have lost consciousness. Later, they describe a set of experiences that feel more real than normal life. many common elements are reported. A feeling of leaving the body, a view of the scene from above, moving through darkness, a tunnel, a bright light, a sense of peace, a review of life events, a presence that feels loving and intelligent, a boundary that cannot be crossed, and then a return. Skeptics point out that the brain under stress can create vivid experiences. Lack of oxygen can create tunnel vision and light effects. Drugs can create strange states. The temporal lobe can create spiritual feelings. And people can learn the typical NDE story from media, then shape their memory to match it. Believers point out something else. Some experiences include details that seem to match the physical world. A person reports hearing a conversation while they were said to be unconscious. A person reports seeing a specific object in a hallway. A person reports a detail about a medical procedure they should not have known. So the key question becomes this: is any part of an NDE veridical? Does it contain accurate information, gained in a way that cannot be explained by normal senses? A classic example people talk about is the shoe on a ledge case. A woman is said to have had an out-of-body experience in a hospital and reported seeing a shoe on a window ledge outside. Later, someone found a shoe there. The story has been repeated many times, often with dramatic confidence. When researchers dig into the record, the story becomes more complicated. Details are unclear. Documentation is weak. What was exactly said and when it was said can be hard to confirm. This is a pattern you will see again and again. A story becomes famous. It spreads. It gets cleaned up as it moves, like a stone polished by water. The ending becomes crisp, but the original data is fuzzy. That does not mean the story is false. It means it is not strong evidence. Strong evidence needs a chain of custody. It needs contemporaneous notes. It needs independent witnesses. It needs a clear test of what the person could have perceived normally. Some researchers have tried to build those tests. They place hidden targets in places that can only be seen from above, like a high shelf. They hope that if someone has an out-of-body experience, they might report the target. The problem is practical. Cardiac arrests are rare events. Survival is not common. NDEs do not happen to everyone. Even when they happen, memory can be incomplete. And even if a person had an out-of-body experience, they may not think to look for a hidden symbol. So years can pass, and you end up with a few cases, and no clear target hits. Skeptics say this is exactly what we should expect if the experience is a brain event. Believers say the experiment may be too artificial. They point out that the experience may not involve seeing the hospital like a camera. It may be more symbolic and narrative. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with the best documented medical cases, where timing is known and where some details are independently confirmed. There are cases reported where a person with cardiac arrest described a defibrillator shock, the placement of pads, the sound of a machine, and the actions of staff at a time when their EEG was flat or when they were judged unconscious. But again, we hit a tough issue. Flat EEG does not prove there was no brain activity. It proves the surface electrodes did not detect clear, organized cortical activity. Deep brain structures could still be active. Brief bursts can occur. And even if a person is not forming normal memories, they might still take in sounds. Also, hospital rooms are predictable. People know what doctors do. Even if you never had a cardiac arrest, you know the idea of chest compressions, of a shock, of a monitor. A person could guess and later feels certain. So the best NDE evidence is usually not a single perfect case. It is a pattern of cases, plus the nature of the experience itself. One thing that stands out is the sense of clarity. Many NDERs say their thinking was sharper than normal. They say they were more awake than awake. This is odd if the brain was in chaos. A skeptic replies that altered states can feel clear even when they are not. Dreams can feel real. Psychosis can feel real. Drugs can feel more real than reality. Another thing that stands out is life change. Many NDERs report long-term changes, like reduced fear of death, increased compassion, and less interest in material status. Skeptics say trauma can cause change too. Believers say the changes look like the person believes they touch something real. There are also cultural differences. People in different cultures report different details. That fits a brain and culture model. But there are also similarities across cultures. That could fit a universal process or a shared human brain under stress. Now step slightly away from near-death experiences and look at deathbed visions. These are reports from people near the end of life who see or sense people who have died. They may say a spouse is in the room. They may reach their arms out to a parent. They may speak to someone who is not visible to others. They may say they are being guided. In hospitals and hospice care, staff have reported these events many times. They often happen in the days or hours before death. They can bring comfort. They can reduce agitation. They can have a calm and gentle tone. A skeptic says this is a brain effect as the body shuts down. Medication, lack of oxygen, fever, and confusion can cause hallucinations, but hospice workers sometimes point out a pattern. The visions are often of familiar, dead loved ones, not random strangers. They are often comforting rather than frightening. They often happen with relatively clear thinking. The patient can be oriented and then speak about a visitor. None of that proves an afterlife, but it raises a question. Why are these hallucinations so structured, so meaningful, and so consistent? A cautious answer is that the mind in dying may focus on attachment, memory, and comfort. The brain might generate social presence to reduce fear. We know humans can sense a presence in extreme conditions. Mountain climbers and sailors sometimes report a felt companion. A different answer is that if some part of a person continues and if bonds matter, we might expect a greeting. We might expect a gentle transition. Hospice reports fit that image. The challenge is again evidence. Most deathbed visions are private. They are hard to test. They can be deeply real to the person, but outside observers cannot confirm what was seen. Now consider after-death communication. This is the claim that living people sometimes have experiences that feel like contact with the dead. It can happen in dreams. It can happen while awake. It can be a voice, a touch, a smell, a light flicker, a sudden clear thought that feels not like your own. Grief can cause these experiences. That is not controversial. Many grieving people report sensing a loved one near them. They might hear their voice in the house. They might see them in a crowd for a moment. They might have vivid dreams. A skeptic says this is the brain trying to adapt to loss. The loved one was a major part of the mind's model of the world. When they are gone, the model still predicts them. The brain produces a presence because it is used to it. And yet, there are cases that feel stranger. A person dreams of a relative who died, and the relative gives a warning. The person later learns something that matches the warning. Or a person has a sudden clear thought, to check on a family member and finds an emergency, or a child speaks about a dead grandparent they never met and describes a detail the family later confirms. These can be coincidence. They can be selective memory. We remember the hits. We forget the false alarms. So to treat after-death communication as evidence, researchers look for verifiable information, not just comfort, but facts. That brings us to mediumship. Mediumship is the practice where a person claims to communicate with spirits and deliver information to the living. Historically, mediumship has been tied to religion, to spiritualism, to ritual. It has also been tied to fraud. In the 19th and early 20th century, there were famous mediums who were later exposed using tricks, hidden assistance, code systems, cold reading, phishing questions, fake photographs, stage effects. This history matters. It sets the baseline. If we treat mediumship as evidence, we have to assume a high level of deception risk. But it is also true that some researchers took it seriously. They built controlled experiments. To understand mediumship, you have to understand two major techniques that can explain a lot of apparent accuracy without any spirits. One is cold reading. This is a set of methods to get information from a person without them realizing it. The reader makes broad statements that fit many people. They watch reactions. They adjust. They ask leading questions. They use high probability guesses. They appear to know secrets, but they are actually collecting hints. The other is hot reading. This is when the reader has actual information in advance. They may research the client online. They may talk to staff. They may overhear. They may get access to records. They may have a network. If you want to test a medium, you must block both. A basic way is blinding. The medium does not see the sitter. The medium does not hear the sitter. The sitter does not give feedback. The medium gives a reading that is recorded. Then the sitter rates it and also rates control readings. Even then, you have to be careful. Sitters can be biased. They can rate a reading as accurate if it feels emotionally right. They can fit ambiguous statements to their own story. So a stronger method is to have multiple sitters. The medium gives readings that are mixed and anonymized. Each sitter rates several readings, including the one meant for them and others meant for other people. If sitters consistently pick the correct one beyond chance, that is interesting. Some studies have reported results like that. The effect sizes are often small to moderate. Skeptics argue the methods are still vulnerable. Maybe subtle cues still leak. Maybe the statements are general enough to fit many. Maybe the scoring method inflates accuracy. Believers argue that when studies are done properly, there is a real signal. There is also a difference between stage mediums and research mediums. In a lab, a medium may not be dramatic. They may just give a list of impressions. It can be messy. A careful listener should ask the same questions a good scientist asks. Were the sitters and mediums truly blind? Were the readings transcribed accurately? Were the control readings matched for length and style? Were the scoring rules set before the study? Was the analysis pre-registered? Was it replicated by independent teams? This last point is huge. In any field, a single positive study is not enough. Now, consider a category of mediumship that is sometimes called veridical mediumship. This refers to cases where a medium gives a specific detail that can be checked, and that was not known to the sitter. For example, A medium says, "Your father keeps showing me a blue toolbox under the stairs, and there is something hidden in it." The sitter later finds a blue toolbox under the stairs with a hidden item. These stories exist. They are often personal and not formally documented. Sometimes they are documented, but not with strict controls. Skeptics have many responses. The medium could have researched. The sitter could be misremembering and fitting the story later. The detail could be lucky, or the medium could make many statements, and only the one hit is remembered. Believers respond that in some cases the detail is too specific and the timing is too clean. So again, the strength comes from the best cases and from repeated patterns. Now we move to a very different line of evidence, cases that look like reincarnation. In some parts of the world, children sometimes claim to remember a past life. They may speak of a different name, a different family, a different village. They may have fears or skills that do not match their current life. Sometimes they have birthmarks or defects that seem to match wounds of the supposed previous person. A major researcher in this area was Ian Stevenson, and later Jim Tucker and others. They collected many cases, especially in cultures where reincarnation is a known idea. Skeptics point out the huge influence of culture. In places where reincarnation is expected, children might pick it up. Adults might guide them. Families might benefit socially or financially if a child is linked to a certain family. There is also information leakage. A child might overhear conversations. Adults might plant ideas, or stories could be adjusted after the fact. But the strongest cases, according to proponents, are those where the child gives many specific statements, some of which are later confirmed, and where the families had no obvious contact. Some children reportedly identify a specific person who died. They may name the town, the job, the death. They may recognize relatives. They may point to a house. In some cases, the child has behaviors that match the claimed death. A fear of water after a drowning. A fear of guns after a shooting. And then there are birthmark cases. A child has a mark that matches the entry and exit wounds of a person who died. Skeptics say birthmarks are common. If you search long enough, you can match patterns. But some matches are said to be striking. In a careful view, this line of evidence is suggestive, not definitive. It has a problem of controls. It is mostly field work, not lab work. It relies on interviews. It relies on memory. And it often happens years after the first statements. But it is also a category where some cases are extremely detailed. Now, a different category is instrumental transcommunication, sometimes called ITC. This is the claim that voices or images from the dead can appear on recordings. People record white noise and later hear words. People take photographs and see shapes. Skeptics are very strong here. They point to pareidolia, the brain's habit of finding patterns in noise. They point to expectation. If you tell someone to listen for a message, they will find one. They point to audio artifacts and radio interference. They point to deliberate hoaxes. Most experts consider ITC weak evidence. A related but more serious category is the claim of physical effects. Objects moving, lights turning on, clocks stopping, apparitions seen by multiple people. This is where folklore and evidence get tangled. We have to be careful. Many physical claims have mundane causes. Wiring issues, people misperceive, memory changes. Group suggestion creates shared stories. But there are also a few well-documented cases of apparitions witnessed by groups, with independent reports that match. Even then, a shared hallucination is rare, but not impossible, and shared reports can influence each other. So again, physical haunting evidence is usually weak unless documentation is strong. Now, let us return to the question of veridical information, because this is where the afterlife claim is most testable. There are a few types. One is veridical perception during an NDE or out-of-body experience. Another is a medium giving a detail unknown to the sitter. Another is a child giving a detail unknown to their family. Another is a death-related coincidence that seems to carry information. In each category, the strength depends on three things. First, how specific the information is. Second, how clean the timing is. Was the statement recorded before the confirmation? Third, how well normal information sources were blocked. If you have high specificity, clean timing, and strong blocking, you have a serious case. Many famous cases fail at least one of these, but some cases appear to do better than expected. Consider an example pattern from NDE reports. A person in surgery reports hearing a specific phrase spoken by a doctor. The phrase is unusual. It is later confirmed by staff. The person should have been deeply anesthetized. Skeptics say anesthesia awareness happens. It is rare but real. A person might hear and later integrate it into an NDE story. Or the person might have heard before they went under. Believers say some cases happen during cardiac arrest when no heartbeat and no breathing are present, and the timing suggests the person could not have heard. But timing in emergencies is messy. People estimate times. Medical records have timestamps, but not always precise to the second, and memories can shift. So even here, it is hard. This is why some researchers focus on a different argument. Not that we have a perfect proof, but that the combined data makes it hard to say consciousness is only a brain product. They argue that if consciousness can be clear during times of low brain function, that suggests something non-local. Skeptics respond that we do not actually know the brain was inactive at the critical moment. The experience might have occurred as the person went down or as they came back up, and memory stitched it into the gap. This is a powerful critique. It is probably the main naturalistic explanation for many NDEs. But the debate is not over, because there are cases where the person reports events that occurred while they were apparently down, and the details match. So the question becomes one of probability. How likely is it that memory stitching, plus lucky guesses, plus hearing, plus expectation, can produce these results across many cases? And how likely is it that some part of consciousness can persist and sometimes perceive? Science is not built to answer questions like this quickly. It is built to slowly reduce uncertainty. Now let us look at another angle. The idea of consciousness as fundamental. In modern science, consciousness is often treated as an output of neural computation. Neurons fire. Networks process information. Subjective experience emerges. But there is a gap. We can measure brain activity. We can map functions. We can predict behavior. But we still struggle to explain why any of it feels like something from the inside. This is sometimes called the hard problem. Some philosophers and scientists propose that consciousness is not an emergent late-stage thing. They propose it is a basic property, like mass or charge or something like information itself. If that were true, then the death of the brain might not be the end of consciousness. It might change how consciousness is organized and expressed. This is not proof. It is a framework that makes afterlife claims less impossible. On the other hand, a framework is not a fact. You can create a framework that allows almost anything. So we return again to data. Now consider research organizations that study these questions. There are labs and groups that try to apply scientific methods to survival claims. They collect NDE reports. They test mediums. They study anomalous experiences. Skeptics often criticize them for bias. Believers criticize mainstream science for ignoring them. A cautious approach is to judge methods, not tribes. Some studies are weak, some are careful. And even careful studies can be misinterpreted. For example, in mediumship experiments, sitters can sometimes pick the correct reading at rates above chance, but skeptics argue that the correct reading may contain more statements that fit anyone, and people pick the one that feels most like their loved one. This can create above-chance results without spirits. Researchers respond by tightening controls and scoring only specific statements, not vague ones. This is a slow back and forth. If you want a simple yes or no, this field will frustrate you. But if you want to understand the strongest evidence and the strongest critique, it is worth staying with it. Now let us build the skeptical toolkit in a clear way. First is confirmation bias. We notice what supports our belief and ignore what does not. Second is selection bias. Stories that are dramatic get shared. Stories that are dull do not. This makes the world seem more paranormal than it is. Third is memory distortion. Memory is not a recording. It is reconstruction. Each retelling changes it. Fourth is suggestion. If you ask leading questions, you can shape what someone remembers. Fifth is probability neglect. People underestimate how often coincidences happen when many opportunities exist. Sixth is pattern matching. The brain finds faces in clouds, meaning in noise, words in static. Seventh is fraud. Some people lie for money, attention, or power. Eighth is misdirection. Even honest people can be tricked. Ninth is social pressure. People conform to group stories. 10th is medical misunderstanding. People overestimate what flat EEG means. They misunderstand anesthesia and consciousness. Now take each tool and apply it to the afterlife evidence. In NDEs, memory distortion and timing confusion can be huge. A person can have a vivid dreamlike experience as they regain consciousness, then later believe it happened during flatline. In mediumship, cold reading, hot reading, and sitter bias can be huge. Even small feedback cues can guide the medium. In reincarnation cases, cultural expectation and information leakage can be huge. Adults can shape the story without realizing. In after-death communication, grief can produce presence and dreams. Coincidences can feel meaningful. So skeptics have a strong case that much of the evidence can be explained without spirits. But skeptics also face a challenge. The best cases do not go away. You can explain many weak cases, but can you explain the small set of strong ones? In any field, anomalies matter. If 99 cases are easy to explain, but one case is not, you do not get to just ignore the one. You also do not get to declare it proof. You simply have to admit uncertainty. And this is where the afterlife debate often becomes emotional. Some people want certainty that there is survival. Some people want certainty that there is not. Both certainty impulses can lead to poor thinking. A better approach is to treat it like a frontier, a place where evidence is partial. Now let us consider a set of claims that come from medicine and neuroscience. There are reports of people with severe brain issues who still show strong consciousness. There are rare cases where a person has very low measured brain tissue due to a condition, yet functions relatively well. There are cases where someone with dementia has a sudden clear moment near the end, sometimes called terminal lucidity. Terminal lucidity is interesting. Some dying people with severe cognitive decline suddenly become clear, speak normally, recognize family, and then die shortly after. A skeptic says this could be random fluctuations, a release from inhibition, or a temporary change in brain chemistry. But it is still odd. It suggests that consciousness can appear when it seems it should not. Again, not proof of an afterlife, but it puts pressure on simple models. Now take a deeper look at the idea of consciousness being tied strictly to the brain. We know brain injury changes personality. We know drugs change perception. We know neurons matter. So any survival model has to explain why the brain matters so much. One survival model says the brain is like an interface. It shapes and filters. Damage to the interface changes expression, not the underlying consciousness. This is similar to how a damaged radio changes the sound of a station, but the broadcast still exists. Skeptics respond that this is a metaphor, not a mechanism. That is fair. But materialist models also have a hard time explaining why subjective experience exists at all. Both sides have a problem. Now another angle is to study cases of shared death experiences. This is when a person near a dying person reports having a related experience. They might sense a presence. They might see a light. They might feel pulled towards something. They might feel the departing person. These reports exist. They are not common, but they are described. A skeptic says they are grief and suggestion, but sometimes they happen unexpectedly, without prior belief. Again, not proof, but a data point. Now let us look at the role of religion and culture. Religions have long claimed an afterlife. Different religions describe different structures: heaven and hell, reincarnation, ancestor realms, intermediate states. If the afterlife were a single objective place, why would descriptions differ? Believers respond that the afterlife might be filtered through expectation. The experience might be interpreted as familiar symbols. Skeptics respond that this is exactly what a brain and culture model predicts. So cultural variation is not decisive either way, but it is important for one reason. It warns us not to treat any single religious picture as automatically confirmed. If there is survival, it may be stranger than our stories. Now consider another set of claims: past life regression under hypnosis. People under hypnosis sometimes describe detailed past lives. They might speak in accents. They might give names and places. Most scientists are skeptical of this as evidence. Hypnosis increases suggestibility. People can create narratives. The mind can confabulate. Sometimes a person later finds a historical detail that matches something in the session, and it feels like proof. But when you test these sessions carefully, many details are wrong or drawn from media and forgotten memories. So past life regression is generally weak evidence. Now consider another angle: apparitions and crisis visions. A crisis apparition is a report where someone sees a loved one at the time of death, often at a distance, and later learns the person died at that time. These reports go back a long time. They can be coincidence, but there are some cases where multiple people report the same event, or where documentation is close in time. Again, not proof, but another pile of papers. Now, before we get lost in categories, let us build a clear standard of evidence for this topic. If you wanted to persuade cautious scientists that something survives death, what would you need? You would need repeatable results. You would need strong controls. You would need a clear mechanism, or at least a clear model that predicts new facts. And you would need the results to be hard to explain by known psychology. Most afterlife evidence today does not reach that bar, but that does not mean it is worthless. In early stages of a science, you often have messy observations, then methods improve. So a fair position is this: there is enough strange data to justify study. There is not enough clean data to declare certainty. Now let us return to mediumship, because it is one of the few areas where controlled experiments are possible. Imagine a study where mediums are isolated. They cannot see or hear the sitter. They are given only a first name or even a code. They give a reading. The reading is scored by the sitter, who is blind to which medium gave which reading. Control readings are included. If the sitter picks the correct reading consistently above chance, that suggests the medium is doing something beyond guessing. But is that something spirit communication? Not necessarily. There could be telepathy between living people. There could be clairvoyance about records. There could be subtle information leakage. Or it could still be statistical quirks. So even a positive mediumship study does not prove an afterlife. It proves an anomaly. This is important. Many people jump from anomaly to afterlife too fast. The afterlife is one hypothesis among several. Now, a different approach is to look for cases where the information appears to come from a deceased mind specifically, not just general psychic ability. For example, a medium gives a detail that fits the personality of the deceased, including private jokes and specific phrasing, in a way that is hard to guess. This is still hard to prove, but it can be powerful in personal life. Now let us slow down and acknowledge something. Many listeners are not here for a laboratory proof. They are here because they have had an experience, a dream that felt like a visit, a scent in the air, a moment of calm that felt like a hand on the shoulder. Science may never fully capture those moments, and yet we can still respect them while being careful, because grief is also a place where people can be exploited. Some mediums charge large fees. Some promise certainty. Some make fear-based claims. A safe rule is this: if someone tries to sell you a guarantee, walk away. If someone pressures you, walk away. If someone claims only they can connect you, be cautious. Now back to the evidence. One of the most interesting subsets of NDE research is the report of people meeting deceased relatives they did not know had died. A person has an NDE, sees a sibling, then later learns a sibling died in infancy and was never mentioned. These stories exist. Skeptics say the family might have talked and the person might have heard, or it could be a lucky guess. But some cases are said to include specific details. Again, the problem is documentation. Most are retrospective. Still, they add weight to the mystery. Another subset is the report of accurate details about distant events. A person in an NDE sees a family member in another location, then later confirms what they were doing. This is even harder to prove, but it is part of the law. Now, consider a more grounded angle: the brain and its limits. We know consciousness can be altered. We know time can feel different. We know memory can be created after an event. So even if someone reports an experience during death, we have to ask, when exactly did it occur? Did it occur during the actual low brain function period or during recovery? Did the person have a brief period of awareness? Could they have heard? Could they have inferred? Many times we cannot know. So NDE evidence often remains suggestive. Yet NDEs are still important because they raise a question about mind and body. If the afterlife were real, NDEs might be a border zone, a transition state, a glimpse. If the afterlife were not real, NDEs might still be a natural process that helps the dying mind cope. Either way, they matter. Now let us talk about the strongest skeptical explanations for NDE features. The tunnel and light can be explained by changes in the visual system under stress. The life review can be explained by memory networks activating in unusual ways. The sense of presence can be explained by social brain circuits. The peace can be explained by endorphins and dissociation. The out-of-body sensation can be explained by disruptions in multisensory integration. These are all plausible, but the skeptic still has to explain the rare veridical claims, and the believer still has to explain the cultural variability. Now, another angle is to look at cases where NDEs occur in situations without clear threat to life. People report NDE like experiences during meditation, during sleep, during fainting, during drugs. This suggests that the experience pattern can be generated by the brain. Believers respond that the brain might be capable of opening to another mode even without death. This again shows how the same data can be read both ways. Now, let us move to the most careful and grounded takeaway. If you are honest, you might say this: we do not have a courtroom-level proof of an afterlife, but we also do not have a simple story that explains everything away. We have a landscape of experiences. Some are likely brain-based, some are likely social and cultural, some may involve deception, and a small number remain genuinely hard to place. Now, for the rest of the episode, let us walk through that landscape in a more documentary way, like a long night in an archive. Imagine folders. Folder 1 is medical border experiences. Folder 2 is hospice and end-of-life visions. Folder 3 is personal after-death contact. Folder 4 is mediumship research. Folder 5 is children and past life claims. Folder 6 is skeptical methods and counterarguments. And then a final folder that holds what all of this means for a human life. In Folder 1, the medical border experiences. You see hospital rooms, you see resuscitation stories, you see people describing leaving their body. Sometimes they describe watching the staff. Sometimes they describe a sense of floating. Sometimes they describe traveling. In some reports, they describe a meeting with someone who has died. In some, they describe a being of light. In some, they describe a place that feels like home. The question you write on the folder is simple. Was this perception, or was this brain theatre? Now, in Folder 2, hospice and end-of-life visions, you see quieter scenes. A patient sits up and smiles. They say someone is here. They reach out. A nurse watches and does not interrupt. Sometimes these moments are peaceful. Sometimes they are confusing. But often they are structured. And the question you write on that folder is the mind creating comfort? Or is someone truly coming? In Folder 3, personal after-death contact, you see letters and diaries. You see accounts of dreams that feel like visits. You see sudden scents. You see lights that flicker at meaningful times. You see people who swear they were touched. You also see people who admit they might be imagining it, but it felt real. The question you write is, how often do coincidences happen? How often does grief create presence? And how often does something else break through? In Folder 4, Mediumship Research, you see transcripts, you see lists of statements, you see ratings, you see statistical tables. You also see warnings about cold reading. You see notes about blinding. You see debates about scoring. The question you write is there a signal? And if there is, what is it? In Folder 5, Children and Past Life Claims, you see interviews. You see maps and names. You see families traveling to meet other families. You see children pointing to houses. You see photos. You see birthmark charts. And you also see the influence of culture. The question you write is this memory, or story, or something that carries over? Folder 6, Skeptical Methods, is like the guard booth at the archive. It has the checklists. It has the known illusions. It has the fraud cases. It has the psychology. It has the statistics. And the question on that folder is, can we be sure, or can we only be careful? Now keep those folders in mind as we dig into a few more concrete examples and methods. A documentary-style approach means we do not just say, I believe, or I do not believe. We ask, what happened? Who saw it? When was it recorded? What else could explain it? What would we expect if it were true? What would we expect if it were false? Now, one of the best ways to think about mediumship is to think about error rates. If a medium makes 100 statements and 10 are accurate, is that impressive? It depends. If the statements are vague, 10 hits is not impressive. If the statements are specific and unlikely, 10 hits could be impressive. So we need a way to measure specificity. A statement like, I see a father figure, is not specific. A statement like, your father had a scar on his left hand from a machine at work, is more specific. A statement like, he is showing me a green lunchbox with a broken latch that he kept in the garage, is even more specific. Researchers sometimes code statements for specificity and accuracy. The challenge is that human lives are complex. Many statements could fit in some way. This is why blinding and controls matter. Now, some mediumship studies have also used proxy sitters. The sitter is a person who does not know the deceased but represents the family. This blocks emotional reactions and cues. If a medium still produces accurate details, that is more interesting. But then the rating problem becomes harder because the proxy cannot confirm. So they have the family rate later. This adds delay and memory issues. Again, messy. Now, a very important concept here is the file drawer problem. Positive results are more likely to be published. Negative results are less likely. So a literature can look stronger than it is. This happens in many fields. So for mediumship and survival research, it matters whether teams pre-register studies and publish, regardless of outcome. Now, step away from mediumship and consider something that sounds simple but is hard. Suppose a person claims an after-death visit dream. How could we test it? We could ask for a message that contains new information. For example, a dead relative tells the dreamer where a document is hidden. Then the dreamer finds it. This becomes evidence. But even then, we have to ask, did the dreamer already know subconsciously? Was the document in an obvious place? Was the message vague? Could it be coincidence? So even tests can be tricky. Now let us talk about the role of coincidence in a big world. If you have millions of people and each has many dreams, then rare-seeming matches will happen. People will dream of a friend and then receive a call. People will dream of a death and then hear of a death. Most will be random. But to the person, it feels like a message. This does not mean no messages exist. It means we need to compare the rate of hits to what chance predicts. Humans are not good at that. Now, let us look at a line of research that tries to do exactly this. Some researchers have studied whether people can know information at a distance, in controlled settings. These are PSI experiments. The results are controversial. Some meta-analyses claim small but consistent effects. Skeptics argue the effects are due to methodological issues, publication bias, and analytical flexibility. But the reason PSI matters for our topic is this. If PSI were real, it could explain some mediumship results without requiring survival. And if PSI were not real, then mediumship results would be harder to explain naturally. So the existence of PSI is a kind of hinge, and it is still debated. Now, let us return to reincarnation cases with a documentary lens. Imagine you are an investigator. You hear that a child is speaking of another life. The child says a name. The child says a town. The child says they died in a certain way. The first thing you do is record the statements before any search. You write them down. You record audio. You gather witnesses. Then you go look. If you find a matching deceased person, you then ask, did the families have contact? Did anyone suggest this to the child? Did anyone in the community know the deceased? Did the child have access to media that mentions the story? You also test the child in ways that reduce cues. Can the child recognize the right house among similar houses? Can they pick the correct relatives without prompting? Can they identify objects that belong to the deceased? The stronger the controls, the stronger the case. Many reported cases do not have these controls, but some are closer. Even in those, skeptics can still argue that subtle information leakage is possible. In small communities, stories spread, children overhear, adults unintentionally coach. So again, suggestive. Now, there is a deeper question. If reincarnation were real, why would children remember at all? Why would memories fade? Why would it happen more in some cultures? Believers propose that memories are more likely to be expressed when a culture expects them, like language. The capacity might exist, but it needs a social frame. Skeptics say this is exactly what social learning predicts. Now, another angle often mentioned is the so-called children who remember lives in cultures that do not strongly believe in reincarnation. These cases would be more interesting. They exist, but are rarer. Again, documentation varies. Now, we have covered many angles. Let us make sure we are not missing something important. One angle is the purely personal, but in a way that can be checked. Some people report receiving information in dreams or impressions that they later confirm, and that they claim they could not have known. For example, someone dreams of a cousin showing them a specific place, and then later they learn the cousin died in that place. Or someone hears a phrase, and later it turns out to be a private phrase of the deceased. These can be strong personally, but for science, they are hard. Science needs many cases, and it needs to separate chance. This is why personal evidence and public evidence are different. A person might be rational to believe based on a strong personal case, but society should not declare it a fact without stronger public evidence. Now, a documentary-style case for the afterlife often includes a main claim. The main claim is not that one category proves it. The main claim is that the convergence of many categories points in the same direction. NDEs suggest consciousness can exist with reduced brain function. Deathbed visions suggest the dying sometimes meet the dead. Mediumship suggests information can come through in controlled settings. Reincarnation cases suggest personality and memory can carry over, and many personal experiences suggest contact. The combined picture is of a mind that is not fully contained. That is the case. Now, the skeptical counter case is also convergent. NDEs can be explained by brain stress and memory stitching. Deathbed visions can be explained by medical delirium and comfort hallucinations. Mediumship can be explained by reading methods, leakage and bias. Reincarnation cases can be explained by culture, coaching and coincidence. Personal contact can be explained by grief and pattern matching. The combined picture is of a mind that is powerful at creating meaning. That is the counter case. So where do we land? A careful place is between. And yet, you asked for a docu-style compelling case. So we can do something honest. We can present the strongest cases and explain why they matter, while not hiding the critiques. A compelling case is not one that hides objections. A compelling case is one that survives them. Now, let us build that compelling core in a few steps. First, define what would count as a strong signal. A strong signal would be accurate information obtained without normal means. So we focus on veridical elements. Second, we ask whether those elements exist. They appear to exist in some NDE reports. They appear to exist in some mediumship studies. They appear to exist in some child cases. Third, we ask whether normal explanations can cover them. Sometimes they can. Sometimes they might. But some remain hard. Fourth, we ask what model best fits the remaining hard cases. One model is survival. Another is living PSI. Another is unknown brain phenomena. Survival is one of the simplest in a sense, because it connects the information to the deceased. But it is also the most radical for mainstream science. So it carries a high burden. Now, in a quiet archive story, we do not need to resolve it. We need to show the file. We need to walk through it calmly. And we need to let you feel the weight of uncertainty. Because uncertainty is real. Now let us talk about a practical thing. If someone wants to explore this topic responsibly, what should they do? First, keep a journal of experiences with dates and times. Second, avoid changing your memory by telling the story too many times. Third, be cautious with mediums. Fourth, look for verifiable details. Fifth, learn the skeptical tools. This helps you avoid being misled. Now let us return to the night and the story. Imagine an investigator sitting with a stack of reports. They read a near-death report where a person describes leaving the body. They read a hospice note where a patient says, "My mother is here." They read a transcript where a medium names a private nickname. They read an interview where a child describes a life and points to a house. They read a skeptical review that explains cold reading. They read a medical paper on anesthesia awareness. They read a psychology paper on memory. And then they sit back. They do not rush. They ask, what is the simplest explanation that fits all of this? It might be that human minds create meaning at the edge of death. It might be that human minds sometimes access information in ways we do not understand. It might be that something of us continues. or it might be a mix. Now, in the last part of this episode, we can bring it to a human conclusion without preaching. Even if you think the afterlife is not proven, the evidence tells you something about people. It tells you that consciousness is strange. It tells you that love and attachment are powerful. It tells you that the mind can reach for something beyond. And even if the afterlife is real, the evidence still tells you something. It tells you that reality may be deeper than the surface. It tells you that a human life might not be a closed loop. It tells you that what you do and how you treat others might echo. In many NDE life reviews, people report seeing the effects of their actions on others. Whether literal or symbolic, it is a strong idea that your life is not just what you feel, it is what you do to other people. Now, let us slow down again. Imagine the archive closing for the night. The lights dim, the folders are stacked, the questions remain. But before we end, there is one more angle to hold up to the lamp. It is not a single proof. It is more like a pattern that repeats across categories. When people talk about evidence of the afterlife, they often focus on visuals: a tunnel, a light, a figure in a doorway, a face in a dream. But many of the most striking reports are not about visuals. They are about information and timing. A patient says a specific relative is waiting, and that relative died moments earlier in another place, before anyone in the room knew. A person wakes from a dream with a simple instruction: check the drawer, and finds a forgotten letter. A medium says a name that no one has said out loud for 20 years, a childhood nickname, and the sitter feels their breath catch. A child says, "I had a sister before," and points to a photograph that was kept away, and later describes a small detail that the family agrees was true. A skeptic can answer each one with a normal explanation. Someone might have heard a hint. Someone might be remembering wrong. Someone might be guessing, and the hit stands out. Someone might be a fraud, and that is why a careful case does not lean on any one story. It leans on the idea that there are too many moments that share a shape, not the same words, not the same symbols, but the same structure. A life ends, a boundary is crossed, and something seems to reach back. Sometimes it reaches back as comfort. Sometimes it reaches back as a warning. Sometimes it reaches back as a detail that can be checked. In the strongest retellings, it does not feel like a human mind trying to make meaning. It feels like meaning arriving. Now that feeling can be created by the brain. Feelings can be wrong. So if we are honest, we say the feeling is not the evidence. The evidence is what survives the check. That brings us back to what makes this topic so hard. Death is a wall. The best evidence would be evidence that crosses the wall in a clean way. But the wall is also where measurement fails. Devices lose the subject. Witnesses are stressed. Memory gets shaken. So we are left with partial windows. And maybe that is appropriate. If this is real, it may not be designed to be easy. Now here is another angle that often gets missed. If there is survival, it might not show up as a loud magic trick. It might show up as a small drift from chance, a small but real signal in mediumship experiments, a small cluster of NDE cases with accurate details, a small set of child cases with too many correct statements, a small rate of crisis visions that occur at the right time. If that is the pattern, then we should not expect the afterlife to behave like a stage show. We should expect it to behave like a weak radio station that sometimes comes through the static, And if it is not real, we should expect people to read meaning into static. The two pictures can look similar. So what separates them? Method, patience, and humility. Humility means admitting what we do not know. A believer should admit how easy it is to be fooled. A skeptic should admit how little we understand about consciousness. Now, let us hold the strongest skeptical point in plain language. The brain is the organ of experience. We change the brain, we change the mind. We injure the brain, we change the person. So it is reasonable to think the mind ends when the brain ends. That is the default, and anyone who claims otherwise should expect hard questions. At the same time, there is a second truth. There is no simple story of consciousness. We can map circuits and still not explain experience. We can describe how the brain works and still not answer why it is like something to be alive. So the default story is not complete. That opens the door, just a crack, to other possibilities. Now imagine what a mature science of this topic would look like. It would treat NDE reports like clinical data, with careful timing and standardized interviews. It would run mediumship studies with strict blinding, pre-registered scoring, and independent replication. It would treat reincarnation claims like forensic work, recording statements early and testing for information leakage. It would measure how often people have after death contact experiences in the general population, and how often those experiences contain verifiable details. It would compare the rate of those details to chance, and it would do all of this without mockery, because mockery kills reporting. People stop sharing experiences if they think they will be punished for it. So we end with a kind of double message. If you are a skeptic, let your skepticism be strong, but not lazy. Do not dismiss a field just because it is messy. Many fields begin messy. Ask for methods. Ask for replication. Ask for controls. If you are a believer, let your belief be warm, but not careless. Do not accept every story as sacred. Do not excuse fraud. Do not skip hard questions. Because if anything in this is real, it deserves honesty. Now come back to the quiet room. The archive is closing. You have seen the strongest categories. You have seen the criticisms. And you have seen why the question will not die. Because even in a world of science, there are still borderlands. And in those borderlands, people report things that do not fit cleanly. If the afterlife is real, those reports may be the first thin signals. If the afterlife is not real, those reports may still be a deep human phenomenon worth understanding. Either way, the file stays open. And for tonight, that is enough. This was a quiet archive story, where the story ends, sleep begins,